at night at 6 o'clock in the morning, just drain it down to 80%, then replace it, pay me for it, for what you use, and leave me 20% in case my kid gets sick and I have to go to the hospital. So, and you make these deals, and those all go onto a database, and we have, we have this software now. There's a dozen companies that are making this and marketing it, deploying it. We have the capacity to do that. We just need the national will. And the third big obstacle is that we have an irrational energy system in this country, and I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to talk about this. But we basically have 50 different public utilities commissions, 120 control districts, each one with its own arcane and Byzantine set of rules that restrict access to the grid. So we don't really have a real national marketplace, and that's what we need to create. We need a national marketplace where every American is hooked to a national unified grid, a marketplace that does what a real market, a real free market capitalism is supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior, which is efficiency, and punish bad behavior, which is inefficiency and waste. Right now, we have a marketplace that is rigged by rules that were written by the incumbents to reward the dirtiest, filthiest, most poisonous, most destructive, most addictive fuels from hell, rather than the cheap, clean, green, wholesome, and abundant fuels from heaven. And we need to change that around. We need a marketplace that will do that will turn every American into an energy entrepreneur. My home, in addition to having geothermal, I have two solar systems on my roof. My home is a power plant, produces a lot more power than I need 24 hours a day. I would be able to sell that back to the grid and get market rates for it. Today, there's virtually no state where you can get, where you can do that all the time. And we need to change that. We need to make it so that we have a market where every American turns into an energy entrepreneur, that turns every home into a power plant, that democratizes the energy system in this country, and that powers this country based upon American initiative and intelligence and resourcefulness, and what Franklin Roosevelt called American industrial genius, rather than Saudi Arabian oil. Now, we've done this before in our country. In 1979, we built an ARPANET grid in our country and the federal government connected every American home to the internet. And a year after that, in 1980, the CEO of IBM said that personal computers were a dead-end technology. And there are a lot of other large computer companies that we all heard of that aren't around today that made that same bet. And today, most of us have personal computers. And the reason for that, we built a national marketplace. And what happened to the cost of information, of bits and bytes? It plummeted to virtually zero. In fact, it's plummeted to zero. One of the companies, I'll tell you just a plug, that Vantage Point owns, that's outside of MySpace, but they own a company called Cha-Cha. If you go on your cell phone and write Cha-Cha, 242-242, you can text any question you want. And within a couple minutes, they'll give you the answer, anything. I was in China the other day, and I was showing it to some Chinese people, and I said, ask me any question, anything. They said, what was Mao Zedong's favorite lunch meal? I typed it in. A minute later, it comes back, spicy brown bean soup. They know everything, and it's free. They don't charge you for anything. It's free information forever. That's what's going to happen to electrons as soon as we create a national grid for energy. We will have free energy forever. In 1996, we built a telecommunications grid in this country. Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, told all the baby bells you have to hook into create a unified grid. And you have to let everybody on it. You can't have any restrictions to access. The lowest cost provider is going to prevail in the marketplace. And that national grid, that national marketplace, spawned a telecommunications revolution in this country. And all these little gadgets that we have in our pockets now, like iPhones, are the offspring of that revolution. But what happened to the cost of telecommunications? Well, today, while I was waiting in the airport in San Francisco, I saw an ad on the TV for a company on CNN, for a company called Vonage, that promises unlimited overseas long distance and local calls for $19. That's practically free. 2 months ago, I made a call from Miami to London that cost $74 for 4 minutes. All of us have done that. That's the old way. But the new way is free telecommunications forever. And that same thing is going to happen to electrons as soon as we build a national grid. Now, on Wednesday of last week, one of our portfolio companies that I'm on the advisory board of, which is called BrightSource, a California company, and we broke ground on the biggest power plant in America in the Mojave Desert. It's a solar thermal plant. This isn't solar voltaics that your grandmother used to bolt to her roof. It's a mirror farm in the desert. So they put a turbine, like you'd find in a gas plant or coal plant, up on top of a giant tower, a scaffold. Then they surround it by giant mirrors, concentric rings of giant mirrors that are manipulated by computers to always shine the sunlight onto that turbine, and half hour after the sun comes up in the morning, that turbine's at 750 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a very efficient way of generating energy. We have contracts with Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, 2.7 gigawatts. That's 2.5 times as big as a nuke plant. But we're building it for $3 billion a gigawatt. We're going to build it in 2 years. It takes 10 years to build a coal plant. It takes probably 30 years to build a nuke plant. It'll take 10 years just to get the permits. So we're building this in 2 years, and it costs $3 billion a gigawatt. A nuke plant costs 15 to 20 billion a gigawatt. A coal plant costs $3 billion a gigawatt, the same as ours. But once you build our plant, it's free energy forever, because the photons are hitting the Earth every day for free. All we have to do is build the infrastructure that's going to pick them up, harness them, and then put them in the lines. Once you build that coal plant, now you've got to go to Appalachia, cut down the whole Appalachian range, ship it across the country in rail car, burn it in power plants, and poison everybody in America, poison every fish, kill 60,000 people, poison 640,000 children born every year, according to CDC, with dangerous levels of mercury exposure, and all this other stuff. And that's the real cost of coal. It happens after you build the plant. Once you build our plant, it's free energy forever. Once you build an oil plant, now you got to go to Saudi Arabia, punch holes in the ground, bring up the oil, refine it expensively, genuflect to the sheiks who despise democracy and are hated by their own people, get in periodic wars that cost $4.3 trillion, bring it across the Atlantic with a military escort that you and I are paying for, not Exxon, spill it all over the Gulf, spill it all over Valdez, burn it and poison everybody in America. So the real costs come after you build the plant. But once you build that solar thermal plant, it's free energy forever. And here's the math. We have 1,000 gigawatts in this country that we use at peak power every day. That's peak power. 500 of those are carbon-based. So to decarbonize, we need to replace that. It's at 2% growth over 50 years, which is the life of a power plant. We need to double that. You can cut that number in half through conservation. So we need, conservatively, 1,000 gigawatts of power to completely decarbonize America and give us free energy forever. 1,000 gigawatts at $3 billion a gigawatt is $3 trillion. That's less than the cost of the Iraq War. For less than the cost of the Iraq War, we can have free energy forever. And guess what? The wind energy, this is a great coincidence, the wind in the Midwest blows at night, and the sun in the Southwest, everybody knows this, shines during the day. So we already have a balance, and all we have to do is harness it, and if we do that, and I'll shut up because I'm getting a clear signal to do so. But let me just say this. I'll say this last thing. In 1929, Franklin Roosevelt, just before the stock market crashed, the stock market was at 385. In 1942, 13 years later, it was at 85. So in 13 years, the New Deal stimulus package kept millions of Americans alive in their homes, at work, on their farms, 10,000 banks from collapsing, but it was not robust enough to create a broad-scale market recovery. Then in 1940, Roosevelt gave an extraordinary speech to this country. It was a year before Pearl Harbor, but he saw the war on the horizon. He said, we're going to build 50,000 airplanes a year. Now, as the aides later admitted, he pulled that number out of thin air. The year before, we only built 2,800. We're going to build, and he said 50,000. We're going to build 25,000 tanks. We're going to build a ship a day, a battleship every 2 months, an aircraft carrier every 4 months. And we're going to do that on and on until the war's over and won. People laughed at him. He was ridiculed by editorialists from the left and the right. They said no industrial mobilization of this kind has ever happened in history. He's overstated. He's overclaimed. He's going to make us look foolish. But he immediately went to Detroit, and he said to the automakers, you're not making cars anymore, you're making aircraft, you're making tanks, half-tracks, amphibious vehicles, bombs and detonators. Within 6 weeks, they had retooled their factories. Within 6 months, they had met his goals. Within 12 months, they had surpassed them. The following year, we made 96,000 aircraft in this country. We had full employment, 100%. 160,000 women went to Detroit with Rosie the Riveter, where they'd been banned before, and found jobs. 200,000 blacks went to Detroit, where they'd been blackballed before, and found jobs. And because we had full employment, a lot of people started spending money on the stock market. The stock market exploded and made us, over the next 20, 30 years, the richest country in the history of the world. Half the wealth on the face of the earth ended up in our nation. We have a big advantage over Roosevelt. We don't have to make stranded assets like he was making to be sent over to Europe to be exploded with no lasting benefit. We can employ millions of Americans putting pylons across the country and stringing wire down the railroad tracks and the existing right-of-ways, building turbines on every farm in the Midwest, bolting solar panels to every southern-facing roof in America, having teams go in and pressure test every home in America and blow in cellulosic insulation, and employ a lot of people doing that who are now unemployed. And at the end of that, we have a system that gives us free energy forever, which is the biggest permanent tax break in the history of the world. And it makes us competitive again on the world market. Because and the Chinese know this, I just came over there, they're spending almost as much on wind and solar as they are on their military. The Waxman-Markey was going to increase our wind deployment by 37% in 5 years. The Chinese have already committed to increase their wind deployment by 20,000% in 5 years, their solar deployment by 1,200%. They see that it's the arms race of the 21st century. We need to get on board. Thank you all very much.
All right. So very quickly, we want to thank our guest speaker. It's an honor to meet you and to have you here in Sacramento. We fully intend to live up to the inspiration that we heard today and absolutely become the environmental capital of the world with the intersection of the environment and the economy. And I want to thank Mr. Patrick Mulvaney, who I think is going to feed Mr. Kennedy in a couple minutes. So thank you, Patrick. And there is an innovative